Whether you're somebody who's sick and trying to get healthy, or maybe you're overweight and want to get thin, or maybe you're someone who's a helper in the health world that's trying to learn more techniques to help people, or maybe you're a conference nerd like me and you just like coming to conferences and learning stuff. But whatever the reason, you're in the right place, and I hope we have a great time together. So thanks for being here. For those of you who don't know me well, I'd like to start out by just telling you a little bit about myself and why I do this thing that I do. Of course, you just heard this whole big intro. So I am a board certified medical doctor and a best-selling author and all of those things. But, before I had the white coat or anybody knew my name, I was a patient, and maybe some of you are too. I was a patient pretty young. I started getting medical problems around 12 years old. I started getting migraines, and these were really serious migraines. I would be in bed throwing up for days. We had all the testing done. They gave me the MRIs and the EEGs and couldn't figure out any trigger for them. And so all they could do was give me something for pain, which was a relief to have something for pain, but it didn't change how often I got them. And so I learned to live with that, even at that age. And then when I hit 16, I started having other problems. I started having arthritis, where I would have pain that would start to move throughout my joints. It could be in one knee and then the next day, the other knee, or one shoulder and the other shoulder. And it was extremely painful, but weird. At least weird as a kid to understand, how could I have a pain so bad in this shoulder that I can't lift my fork, but then the next day it's gone, but it's in this shoulder? It sounded too strange to even try to share with my mom, but I did mention I was having pains, and we went to the doctor and she gave me something for pain. And so that continued on, and I started developing more and more unusual things. I continued with the migraines. I have continued with the joint pains, and then I started getting rashes. I got a rash across my face, which we now know to be a butterfly rash, called that because the wings go over your cheeks and then the bridge goes over your nose, the caterpillar is the nose. And that would have happened, especially when I was exposed to a lot of sun. So one day, my best friend came over and we spent the whole day at the pool. And when we came back, I had a horrible migraine and I was vomiting. And when I came out of the bathroom from vomiting, my rash was really bright red over my face. And my parents took a look at me and went, all right, something's really wrong here. So they called my doctor, and she said to meet her at the ER. And at that moment, when she saw all of it together, finally clicked what I had. And she told my family she thought I had lupus. Now, that really made my mom angry. She told me recently, my mom said she was mad. She said, I've been taking you into the doctor all this time, trying to figure things out. And then we walk in there and she just says, you have lupus. No, of course you don't have lupus. But it was really, it's a horrible diagnosis to get. Lupus is an autoimmune disease where your own immune system, which is supposed to attack things like viruses and bacteria, starts attacking your own organs. So it's a very dangerous and difficult disease, and it can be a deadly one. Well, they did the blood test. They confirmed I did have lupus. But what they also found out was, silently, unbeknownst to me, my kidneys were also failing. One of the things that lupus can do is it can attack your organs. And it's very common to have kidney failure, although it can also attack your heart, your lungs, your brain, and other areas. So when they did the test, my kidney function was really, really low. My blood pressure was through the roof. The next day, they scheduled a kidney biopsy for me. And then the following day after that, I'm sitting in the nephrologist office with my mother and my grandmother, listening to this nephrologist give me this diagnosis. And, I come from a family of immigrants. I'm first generation born in America. My mom was 5 years old when she came over on a boat through Ellis Island with my grandparents, who were Holocaust survivors, refugees who wanted to restart after the war and start a new life here in freedom. And so here I was, first generation. I'm an only child. And so I was going to live the American dream and have all the things that they couldn't have. They came to this country not even speaking English, having no work. They were working in factories with their hands, trying to just create something new here. And I was going to live that American dream. And now I'm really, really sick. And the nephrologist says that I have the most aggressive form of lupus nephritis, lupus-induced kidney failure. And he said it was called membranoproliferative, can't say that 3 times fast, which is the most aggressive form. And I was in stage 4 kidney failure. And when my family asked what that meant, he said it means that at most she's got 6 months before her kidneys fail. And my mom said, what does that mean? And he said, well, if she lives, it means dialysis, but she might not make it. So here I am at 16, sitting with my mother and my grandmother, hearing this news that no, I don't just have some weird joint pains and headaches, I'm dying. And that was a really, as difficult as it was for me to hear it, it was more difficult to see the impact of my family. And one of the things I really teach my clients and the people I work with is that you don't get sick by yourself. Illness is something that happens to everyone who loves you at the same time. And my grandmother, I never saw her cry. She is tough, tough stock. I mean, she's a Holocaust survivor who also graduated feeling lucky and determined to live the best life possible, to let go of the past and embrace happiness. She's an incredible person. Actually, it's the anniversary of her death is coming up next week. She lived till 99, but I never saw her cry before that day. That day we came home from the hospital and she was on her knees crying, begging God to take her life to spare mine. And to this day, it's burned into my mind, that image that I still see it. Now, I'm going to give away the ending and let you know I made it, but it was difficult. And when we asked the doctor what we could do, there weren't clear answers. Back when I was 16, we didn't have all the fancy new medicines we have now. And, you know, it's sound old back in my day, but we didn't have Plaquenil and Celsep and all the different medicines they use now. There was steroids, prednisone. And what they were using at the time was what my nephrologist told me, that entryway to get us revved up was to tell us there was an experimental new treatment I could try that involved using chemotherapy to shut down the immune system to try to save the kidneys. And so if you've ever known somebody who has cancer, who needed chemotherapy, you might have heard that they are much more sensitive to infection. And in fact, people with cancer often die of infections. And the reason is that a side effect of chemotherapy is it shuts down the immune system. So they thought, what if we do it on purpose? What if we give high doses of chemotherapy to someone with lupus nephritis and see if we can reboot the immune system? What if we shut it off with high dose of chemo and then let it reboot and see if the lupus is quieter? And it was excruciating. Okay. So from 16 to 18, I took 7 different kinds of medicines, super high dose steroids, plus in addition to that, all the medicines that had to protect me from the steroids and the chemo. And I took chemotherapy on top of that. They were giving me high doses of hormone suppression because chemotherapy could cause ovarian cancer. They were trying to suppress puberty to try to save some of my eggs that could be destroyed by the chemo. It's a lot. And some of you might be sick and know that it's a lot. But I was raised in an immigrant family where you do what your doctor says. And that's what we did. And I was also raised in a family of trauma resilience because, as I said, my grandparents are Holocaust survivors, and yet they didn't carry trauma with them into our relationships. They taught me that we are lucky and that we can choose in any moment to embrace what's good and our happiness and how lucky we are, rather than looking at the pain of what happened before. So I was very focused on that and have always felt very lucky. I mean, any of my family that died or suffered in the Holocaust would have traded for lupus any day to live at home with their family, with doctors, and getting to go to school. So I still felt very lucky. And my mother is also very focused on keeping me from embracing the idea of disease or my own demise and staying focused on who I was and what I wanted to be. And so even though I was in all AP classes and getting chemotherapy, I didn't miss anything. It was, okay, you have a test on Monday, but you have chemo on Fridays. So when are you going to study for that test so that you can, make sure you keep up your straight A average while getting all your medical stuff done? And so she was amazing. She kept me focused. And even though I could hear her crying sometimes in her room, she was very tough and strong for me. And so I graduated at the top of my class and I got a scholarship to my dream college, Carnegie Mellon, the nerd school that I always wanted to go to. And my last chemotherapy was 1 week before my first day of college. So I did it. And the greatest news was after 2 full years of chemo, they tried to stop, but the lupus kept rebounding. After 2 years of chemotherapy, finally, they said I was in remission. Now, remission, when it comes to autoimmune disease, does not mean that you don't have a disease anymore. In fact, you very much have a disease. What it means is you're not currently dying from the disease, which was absolutely true. You took a blood test, there was lupus antibodies, positive ANA. I had messed up complement levels, all these things that those of you who track autoimmune would know what I'm talking about. There was protein in my urine because there was damage to my kidney. So normally protein is too large a molecule to get into the urine, but if there's damage to your kidney, it can. So I was told I would always have protein in my urine because of the damage that was done. Okay, fine. As long as I'm not currently dying and the kidneys are stable, hallelujah, let's go to college. And so that's what I did. And I was really, really excited. And I went to college. But I think I was blessed by lupus in many ways. One, just because of what I get to do today, but two, because of the perspective that it gave me. Being told that you're going to die or possibly could die at 16, it can affect you in multiple ways. You could become hopeless and why even try, why even live? Or you can become like me. I am very, very proactive at trying to juice everything I can out of life. I show up and I'm in the room. I'm ready. I want to laugh. I want to dance. I want to sing. I want to learn. I want to just get everything I can at every moment. So I showed up at college hungry for knowledge and excitement and connection and love and all the things I was going to do. And I had a blast at college. I absolutely loved it. And at my college, you weren't supposed to be able to start doing genetic research until you were a junior. And the summer after my freshman year, I just kept going to the labs asking if I could do genetic research. And they kept saying no, but I just wouldn't stop showing up. And so finally, one of the scientists allowed me into his lab and I started doing genetic research that summer leading into my sophomore year. And I got to have 3 full years of genetic research under my belt by the time I graduated, got to publish and learned so much about cells and genetics. And the information that I learned then has also contributed to my ability to create the protocols that I have rather than kind of general ideas about health. So all of this really helped me, but I really just got as much as I could. And I was doing well. I maintained my remission through college. And then I decided to go to medical school. Now, one of the things with autoimmune disease is we are told to get enough rest and avoid stress. That is very difficult to do in medical school. And I learned that quickly. And I actually ended up getting sick again. My junior year of medical school, I figured out I'd been working 100-hour weeks. There were days where I would go to the hospital and come home. I'd get up at 3 to go and pre-round in the hospital, get home and pass out during Jeopardy at 7. And sometimes I would wake up and just change my scrubs and go right back in. I mean, it was really, really difficult. And at one point I realized that I was having a problem. I started getting double vision, where I would go to the hospital and I'd be doing rounds, and then suddenly the whole world would split into two, and I'd have to hold on to a wall and just wait for everything to come back together again. And I would kind of hear like a buzzing sound, and I'd just stand there. And then when I opened my eyes and the world was single again, I just continue on my rounds and seeing patients. But I knew I had a problem. And I went to, a lot happened. I ended up collapsing when the clinics one day. People thought I was a med student, just passed out on a chart, but I was gone. Right before that happened, I remember that the intern was talking to me and I wanted to answer, but I couldn't really talk. Everything felt weird, sounded weird, and I couldn't really say anything. And I fell asleep. And when I woke up, the clinic was already emptied out. I was left there to rest and finish charting, I guess. And I was very, very, very confused. I remember all I could think about was I wanted to go home. And I picked up my keys and I got into my Jeep. And thankfully, I lived only a couple of blocks from the clinic, but I actually couldn't remember where I lived. And I was stopping on each street, looking back and forth, trying to figure out, was it my street yet? But I ended up getting home. And when I woke up after a few hours of being passed out, I felt like I might be normal again, but I wasn't. I went to my doctors and they ran all the tests, and it turned out that lupus had created a new antibody. And instead of attacking my kidneys, it was now attacking my body in a new way, creating antiphospholipid or antibodies that cause blood clots. So I was actually having mini strokes. Now, I'm very lucky. Always, that it wasn't a major stroke, that mini strokes, the blood clots will dissolve again and you can kind of return to normal without permanent damage. But it was terrifying. And at that point, I was also a doctor and I understood what I had. You know, when I was 16, there was no internet. Can you believe that? There was no internet. There was no email. There was no Google. And so I really didn't have any way of, the only way I could learn about what I had was with a book. My mom gave me a book. I started reading it and thought it was way too depressing and got rid of it. So I was able to just focus on life. But as a medical student, I knew exactly what I had. And when I got the blood clots and had to sit with my doctor and talk about how, the disease was progressing, that I was definitely staring down a shorter lifespan than most, that I was facing disability at some point, probably by my 40s. And that I wouldn't be able to have children because between the lupus, the kidney failure, and the blood clots, I wouldn't survive it. So that was really hard. And I got to say, I had about 2 weeks of feeling really sad about that, which for me is a long time to be down. But I leaned on my friends and I talked about it. And I finally came back to the way I usually feel was, I'm lucky because we caught it. And there's something I can do. They told me if I inject myself with blood thinners in my belly or my butt every day for the rest of my life, I won't have a major stroke. Now, if I fall and hit my head, I can bleed out and have a stroke, which is scary for a clumsy person. But there was something I could do and I wasn't dead. And I just gotten my first choice of residency at UCLA in California, UCLA Harbor. And I was excited about life again. And I said, you know what? Nobody knows how long they have. Nobody does. But how many people out there get to live their dream? And I'm living it. I'm about to be officially a doctor and I'm going to have my first choice of residency. I can be a doctor in a wheelchair if I become disabled. It's going to be all right. And I just kept going. And I came back to this place of excitement and gratitude. And so I really did finish. I'm going to share my screen. I did graduate, of course. And here's my family here. And my grandmother that I was talking to you about, this is her right here. Like I said, she lived to 99 and she had always hoped she would get to see me graduate from med school, and she did. And she lived long enough to see me do a lot more. That's my dad. He's 6'7". That's why he's even bigger than me with that hat on. And you can see even in the picture, I have that swollen face that you get from steroids. We get real round faces and big chipmunk cheeks. But I did it. I graduated and it was really exciting. But the most exciting thing that happened after that, right around the time that I'd gotten into my residency, was that I fell in love. And that really changed the whole trajectory of my life. That's my husband, Thomas Tadlock. At the time, he was my boyfriend. And we fell in love really quickly. And I got to say, as a scientist, I never really believed in the idea of soulmates until I met this man. And we fell in love extremely quickly. And it was only about a month in where we were talking about marriage. And I had to really sit down and talk to him and tell him that, I have a disease where I'm not going to live a long life and you're going to have to take care of me when I become disabled. And I can't have your children. And it's a very difficult conversation to have with the most beautiful, amazing person you've ever met that you want to grow as old as you can with, that you want to live your life with. And he just looked at me and took my hands and said, I'd rather live a short life with you than a lifetime with anybody else. So we'll just make it the best darn life you could ever have. And I went, yeah, I'm in, let's do it. So what happened was my husband is actually, he's a best-selling author himself. His book is called Miracle Metabolism. Now, at the time, he was a mad scientist trying to discover the key to metabolism. What he understood that I think is missing from the medical world, I know is missing from the medical world and the fitness world, is that there must be an ideal diet for humans for them to have a fast metabolism, to lose weight easily, to gain muscle easily. And it made no sense to him that when he was getting his master's degree in exercise science and health promotion, that they were saying, well, some people do low carb and some do high carb and some do high protein and some do low fat and some do high fat. And he's going, where's the science? This is not science, right? If there is an ideal diet for a cat and there's an ideal diet for a giraffe, there's an ideal diet for a human. We are not so diverse. We are cellularly the same. And so we have just lost our way and we don't know what our ideal diet is anymore. But the idea that his professors didn't know either and tried to blow it off as different strokes for different folks, that is just not the case. Biodiversity in humans is not a real thing when it comes to our diets. We are all the same species. We have the same cellular mechanisms. We have the same organelles, the same enzymes. We have the same cellular requirements. So that was his fascination. And he had developed a protocol already that was already catapulting him into fame for rapid fat loss. So he was getting called by MTV, which it was cool back then. I don't know anymore. I'm so out of touch in my 40s, so if that's a thing anymore. But at the time, they were calling him in to get people a 6-pack in 3-4 weeks because, you know, they needed to make a music video and they were drinking too much beer, and he could do it. So when we decided to get married, I asked him if he would train me because I wanted to look like a movie star in my wedding dress. And so he changed my diet for me. Now, I had been a vegetarian since I was 13, but I ate eggs and cheese every meal, lots of processed foods, lots of oils. And so my diet was very unhealthy. And I thought it was healthy, but it was very unhealthy. So he told me, listen, we have to get rid of all the saturated fat. So all the eggs and the cheese and the dairy, all that stuff's got to go. And he put me on super high amounts of raw vegetables. And I'm going to teach you the protocol that we use. But he also included meat at the time because he hadn't gotten to the stage of his research yet, understanding about how we don't need meat for protein. And he thought we did. So he would tell people to eat very high quality, free range, kind of like what paleo is now, but many years before paleo became a thing. I refused to eat the meat because I'd been vegetarian and I had to give up all my cheese and eggs and everything. I mean, he did suggest I could eat egg whites, but that was disgusting. So I just gave him up. And so what happened was, first of all, it worked. And I lost over 20 pounds. I went from, here's me before, I was about a size 11. And I went from a size 11 to a size 3 in about 3.5 months. This is us the weekend before we got married. We got married in Maui. We eloped with just our best friends and our closest family. And he looked good too, I know. But this was us a few days before we got married in Hawaii. But even more exciting than the results for our fitness was that here I was as an intern working 30-hour shifts, multiple days a week, working 80 hours a week. They'd finally made a law that you couldn't work more than 80 hours a week yet, but we didn't really say anything if we did, if you know what I mean. But I was working extremely long. I was a new doctor with high levels of stress because when you just graduate med school and then you see sick people and it's suddenly up to you to fix them, it's pretty stressful. And so here I was working the most I ever worked with the highest level stress ever. And I had tons of energy. I had no joint pain. I had no migraines. I felt incredible. And even more exciting than that was when we went to the hospital to get my labs drawn right before our wedding, all the labs were negative for lupus. Now, at the time, I had been sick with lupus for 12 years, a dozen years where I had had positive labs for lupus and symptoms, my ANA, dsDNA, all the different antibodies, complement levels, plus my high cholesterol that I was told was just genetic and had nothing to do with all the cheese I ate. I had antibodies that caused blood clots. All of those things were negative. And my doctor was very confused because he had my chart from when I used to live in Pennsylvania. And so he thought it was a lab mistake. And he said, go get married and come back and we'll recheck. And when we rechecked it, they were even better than before. My cholesterol was 150. All my markers were completely negative and they were stumped. So I kept taking my blood thinners for a year after my net markers were negative because my doctor told me I was treating his anxiety because he was terrified that I would have a stroke. After a year, I finally stopped that. I was off all medications. And so that was 16 years ago. And I have never had a relapse from a lupus in 16 years. I also have no protein in my urine ever since that time. In spite of having had kidney failure 12 years prior, I had a full recovery in my kidney function as well. Now, we rode this for a while. I didn't really understand that I was well. And I think that's something that's really important to point out is a lot of times people are upset that their doctors don't recognize how much better they are after changing their diet. I was a doctor and I didn't recognize that I was healed. I was trained in Western medicine. I'd been sick since I was a child. I just assumed it was a remission, even though it was a remission unlike any I've ever seen where I had no blood markers or symptoms. Because even in remission before, I still required medicines for pain. I still required some medication. So we didn't know what to do with it. So we just enjoyed it. And I kept going to the doctor until I was fired a year later by my rheumatologist because he said he couldn't find anything wrong with me. A few years after that, I decided that I had been healthy for so long. I wanted to do something I was told was impossible. That was us at our wedding day. And here's the impossible becoming possible. Took a lot of convincing from my husband because I had told him that it would kill me. But that was the me that had, blood clot antibodies and blood clots and kidney failure, not the me that had been healthy for 4 years. So finally convinced him and got pregnant, scared the bejesus out of my OBGYN, who went, "You can't used to have lupus. You have lupus. Oh my God, you're a high risk pregnancy." And she sent me to the high risk gynecologist, who refused to follow me because I was too healthy, sent me back to her. So she just obsessively saw me really often, constant ultrasounds, constant blood tests. And it went really well. They were predicting I was going to get sick pregnant. It didn't happen. Then they said that the lupus was going to come back after birth. Well, I had to have a C-section because my son was breech. He was butt first, which I always joke, if you knew him, you'd understand. But he was born breech. And so I had to have a C-section. And in spite of that, he went really well. By the way, I brought this on for you to see. So they wanted to medicate me when I was pregnant, but I refused because there was no signs or symptoms of lupus. Some people choose to do it anyway. But for me, here I was in 2004, right before I changed my diet, and I still had positive markers for blood clots. I had positive dsDNA antibodies. And here's me pregnant with no blood clot antibodies, right? And then here's me in 2004 with a positive ANA. But then here's me pregnant with a negative ANA. So it didn't make any sense to me why I should be taking meds if I had no lupus. I am actually not anti-medicine, by the way. I am still a Western doctor, and I think they can be life-saving. But at the time, I didn't feel that I needed my life to be saved. So he was born perfect, and I had no issues. And really exciting was when I got home, it was my birthday 9 days later. And 9 days later, I was able to put on my pre-pregnancy clothes like it never happened, which at the time, my husband had the largest boot camps, fitness boot camps in Orange County, California. He did a full photo shoot because he said, "This is going to be good for business." Oh my God, because he had women in his boot camps that were trying to lose baby weight whose kids were in college, So we realized at this point that we had come across something extraordinary, that metabolism was not just about my ability to lose weight or maintain a low body weight, which I was able to do. Obviously, if I lost my baby weight, I'd gained 40 pounds and it was gone in 9 days doing nothing but nursing and laying around. Obviously, I had a fast metabolism that allowed my body to lose weight easily. But for the first time, we realized that maybe metabolism is not just about how quickly you can lose body fat, but maybe it's about how quickly your body can repair itself and return to baseline or adapt to new circumstances. That I could be pregnant and then be done being pregnant, and my body just snaps back to the way it was before. That I could heal from lupus, that I could heal my kidneys. And so we then dove into the research as we really wanted to understand what happened. Is it reproducible? And if so, how do we help others like us? Well, we did go ahead and have one more kid. This is me 2 days before giving birth. I was told that I'm the happiest pregnant person. I even smile when I'm puking because I'm throwing up from pregnancy, not from chemo, So I'm always smiling. So that's me 2 days before giving birth. And this is a photo shoot from Halloween. This is my silly family. My Solomon, he is also a bookseller. He came out with his own book, 50 Comebacks for Vegan Kids, 5 stars on Amazon. He just turned 13. And there's Alex, he's 9. And always fun to put a wig on the bald guy. There's Thomas and me just having fun on Halloween. So I'm so grateful for my family. And the word's gotten out. I mean, what we decided to do was we're going to continue to test things to make sure that what we do is reproducible before we ever bring it to the public. So that's what we did. We tested it, and only when we realized that we had something that could be reproducible and help every person who does it get those results, that's when we brought it to the public. And I think that's really important. A lot of times I'll see people who are teaching something just based off personal experience, but it's not based off of making sure that they understood what happened to them. And I don't consider that to be ethical, especially as a scientist and as a former patient. I don't find it to be ethical to say, I had this and I'm better, so do what I did, without really being able to confirm that it's reproducible and that it's scientific. There have been people who've suggested, maybe you got better because of love. That would make it harder for me to share because there's only so much Tom can do to get around and have people love him. But I was sick and in love for 6 months before I changed my diet.